the sexual, the emotional side of things, right? So I do it over at tantricacademy.com. This is where I have my free trainings, where I have my coaching program, where I have my, free offers, free articles. It's a ton of a whole archive full of just free stuff over there.
So take us right from the genesis. How did you get started in this and why?
So it started because I was struggling with these things. I was struggling with women. I was struggling with, healing my mother wound. I was struggling with not finding who I am as a man in this world. And it was just so many struggles. And I didn't feel like I had any mentors or guides to show me like what to do when I was growing up. So that led me to travel the world trying to find answers. And I traveled the world for years and years. And finally, I was in India, in the Himalayas, in the mountains, the cliche. And I found yoga, I found Tantra, and it just clicked. And I was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And since then, that was my practice for years and years. I've been doing that for 15 years now, every day. In the beginning, it was like an obsession, right? Hours and hours of a day, just practicing these things and implementing them in my life, seeing the change in my life, in my relationship, and who I become. And then I was like, this is amazing. I started to tell my friends and people around me, and they wanted to have the information as well. So I started to have small gatherings of people, and they were blown away. And they also had the same transformation. So I knew I was onto something. I knew I could package all this like ancient philosophy and methods that was like very esoteric or mystical or all that into something very modern and potent. So that's how this whole coaching business and program was created from the beginning.
You mentioned that you've been doing this for 15 years, and I'm 35 now. And in my early teens, so about 15 years ago, I was struggling. So I was like, where was Steffo when I needed that guidance in my early 20s? Was that when you mentioned that you went through, was it something that more so you went through when you're at a younger age, or is this more so a more recent struggle and then you started to learn as you were progressing through this?
No, this was all the way from my childhood, right? I struggled with a very difficult upbringing, not having a mother who was very emotional, absent, alcoholic, bipolar, all that, never getting the love from the feminine, So it was a huge trauma, and that reflected in, you know, not being able to relate to women, and not getting girlfriends, and when I did have in a relationship, it was just a roller coaster, and so I had to do the work to heal all that, to be able to relate to the feminine in a healthy, mature way, so that started early on.
Some of my friends, some of my male friends, they've ignored that part, like the feminine aspect of actual women, because they always think that women are so masculine. That's because of the type of woman they date or they've come in contact with. What do you find is some of the commonalities that men experience who are struggling with this as they're dealing with trying to understand women?
Today there's a huge disconnect of like, I want to meet women, I want to have a relationship, I want to have sex. A lot of young men are wanting these things, but they go to quick fixes, and this is like an epidemic in the world today of men just like turning to porn instead of actually going out there and trying to meet people and socialize. Men turn into video games and distractions, of maybe alcohol, weed, video games, and just staying at home, in the comfort zone rather than going out. And if they really want to date, they usually go to, the swiping on the apps which is also again like very superficial. It can work for some, but a lot of guys, what I see in my work, they don't get matches. And what happens with all these things combined is that they get frustrated and they feel like it's not working for me, right? And I don't know what to do. So they have all these issues with confidence or, anxiety of approaching or even being social. They just stay at home. That's a huge commonality and issue I see, especially today.
I will agree because I see a lot of men who experience dating rage and they get very frustrated very quickly and it lasts for so long. And I think many of it is because, to your point, when you're so used to an online interaction, right? Like I can talk through my video game, I can talk through my thumbs because you're swiping left or right. It kind of hampers you when you have to go out there and actually talk to a female and understand what you can offer her to make her interested in you. Do you find sometimes that that is a disconnect where with between men and women, where men will approach women like they're speaking to other men instead of actually speaking to women for what they are, actually women?
I find that more in relationship itself and like maintaining polarity within a relationship. Yes, they might start to treat them, more like the masculine rather than like upholding the masculine pole themselves so that woman can just relax into her femininity. In the beginning, in the dating, I just find it's more anxiety and not knowing what to say that kinds of like that makes it all confusing or they feel lost. Like, what am I going to say next? I'm running out of things to say, or I don't know how to, keep this going. So it's maybe not more masculine, but more as a friend. Like, oh, I'm treating her as a friend and I'm trying to be a nice guy and please her rather than of just like owning that, oh, I am attracted to this person and I'm going to communicate that, and that is scary for a lot of men because we don't want to see as being canceled in this cancel culture, right? And we don't want to cross any boundaries and we want to be gentlemen. So it's very confusing of like, how am I being a gentleman but also showing that, hey, I'm a man, you're a woman, and I can convey that I'm attracted to you without being a sleazebag or a creep, right?
Yeah, yeah. Imagine being canceled for holding the door for a lady, right? She
Right.
probably she probably look at you like, well, you're only holding the door for me so you can look at my ass as I walk by you, or something along those lines. And you raise a good point because it could be very true where it's like if I am I if I'm going to be too masculine, is that toxic? If I'm going to be too forward, is that aggressive? If I'm going to be too honest, is that harassment? Like it seems that like men have to understand where that line is, but I think a lot of times we miss that line is because we don't look for it. We just say, okay, you know what? I saw on the internet one day that I have to be making $100,000, I have to be 6 foot tall, I have to be packing 6 inches, and every girl will love me. And if they don't, I'm going to take the Mike Tyson approach, right? And I'll quote and say that, well, I'm going to make you love me,
Right.
right? Like, how can we maybe educate men to say that being masculine isn't wrong, it isn't bad, but maybe your approach is what is missing.
Exactly. I 100% agree. We see today there's so many, so-called, you know, men's coaches and they're trying to teach young men on how to be a man. And they're teaching all this macho and bravado. And it's not really real to these guys. They're just listening to other people's opinions and trying to implement them in their own life, even if it's not resonating with who they are. And that is the disconnect. They're trying to just, manufacture what you're supposed to be like according to other male teachers. So that is a huge issue. What I am doing is like, I'm taking away all of that. Like, don't listen to what other people say, but trying to find your own inner authentic expression. So it's all about how can you date? How can you lead a relationship from an authentic place, authentic masculinity, right? And that is not to go over the top and dominate, but it's also not to be a people pleaser and a doormat. So it's somewhere in between because both is an aspect of the shadow masculine. One is trying to be aggressive and dominate because you feel insecure. And another one is to surrender and not taking, the leap of faith and just going after it because you feel fear, right? So both is not in the like equilibrium of the mature masculine, right? So we have to find that authentic expression and operate from there. And when we find that, we know how to be, displaying sexual interest without being overtly aggressive or macho. And that is a sweet spot.
Why do you think so many men, especially I would say online, gravitate to those type of coaches who preach the aggression, the in your face method? What do you think the allure is to young men who are following that type of advice?
Because we are right now, as a society, in a very interesting development. So we're coming out of post Me Too movement and the cancel culture. This is new. Our fathers and grandfathers, they did not grow up with that. They grew up in a different time, right? So now the young men, the generation behind us, right, they're growing up in this post Me Too world. What happened now is that a lot of guys are lost and they feel confused and they don't have a strong male voice, of they're saying, hey, men are also struggling. It's not only the women. We have to acknowledge the women and understand, like, yeah, this has been going on for a long time. But right now, what is occurring is that men don't have a voice. They don't have a leader of just saying, I understand you. You feel lonely. You feel frustrated. You don't get any attention from the females, except if you're 10 and have the money and all the things you said. But the average guy don't get any attention and they feel lost and frustrated. No one is acknowledging them. So there was a big gap of years of no one acknowledging these men. And finally, we start to see them emerging in social media. And since they were very much displaying their ego and personality, they were very controversial, they were very outspoken, they were very loud, they got a lot of attention. And so the core message was speaking to these guys, and they were like, oh, finally, a leader in the space. Finally, someone understands what we are struggling with, the young men. And so they kind of hijacked that voice of the society, of the young men, and then, apply their own ego or alphaness on top of that, right? So that's how I see this whole thing playing out. Like, because I've been following all these things, all these trends along the way, and I see the cause and effect here.
I've been following it too. So, and I will agree with you. It seems like, let's say around 2019, this really took off. And then you had the pandemic, you had the Me Too, you had a lot of stuff. And then you saw the rise of some of these men. What I did notice, to piggyback off of what you said, is that you had a group of men that were neglected before the Me Too. And then the Me Too, what they saw men that were quote unquote more established, better off, financially better looking, more money. They started to become targeted. So they were looking at it as, if they can't win, the top tier now of men, how can I win? So they were yearning, they were in a lot of ways desperate for someone to say and take them by the hand and say, it's going to be okay. Follow me. Right. And I think what happened is there's a lot of men whose emotional state was being taken advantage of, was maybe nurtured in a way that was more destructive because instead of improving themselves for themselves, they're improving themselves to compete and say, hey, that girl that turned me down when I was in my 20s, 25, 30, here I am now. I'm a little bit taller, a little bit more muscular, a little bit more money. Now I'm going to have my way with them. And they're just passing on the trauma in a different way. And I truly do feel bad for a lot of those men because I think they have the right intentions. They're just misguided in a way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally believe so. I want to believe in an upcoming age where, the feminine and masculine, so to speak, not just gender, but just like the energetic characteristics of things can, find healing and forgiveness of each other because I really feel we need that and, less of these gender wars and just accepting that, yes, women had a lot of difficulties in the past and inequality, but that doesn't take away that also some men have also had their issues. So if we can come together and just accept and acknowledge each other and and start to heal this, this gap between the masculine and feminine, that is, I think that would take, the planet to a different level if we can get to that place. It's not just about equality. This is about, acknowledging each other uh, as equals, but also our differences, because